Hi, Christie.
Hi, Jeff.
We're recording now.
The many hours of conversation you and I have had, we've had probably half of them that haven't been recorded.
You know what we should do? We should start a podcast.
You think? Let's call it the Why and the Buy.
All right.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Why and the Buy podcast. This is Christie Walters, and I am here with my friend, Jeff Bajorek. How are you, Jeff?
Hi, Christie. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Are you ready to talk prospecting? And we're going to just barrel right on through. We've got 2 tenets to go through today.
Of course I'm ready. The problem with most salespeople is that they're not ready to talk about prospecting, and that's where we run into trouble keeping that pipeline full. But I'm excited to use this opportunity to talk about what I think are 2 very, very important and often overlooked aspects of prospecting and your approach and your mindset to prospecting. So today we want to talk about expertise. And I think in part 2 of this episode, which you may or may not hear in a couple of weeks, is going to be about swagger. And that is a term that is certainly not my own, but one that I've taken ownership of. And I'm excited to get into those over the next couple of prospecting episodes.
I love it. And the word swagger, as you know, is one of my favorite words of all time. Really is. So I want to remind everyone of what we are reviewing here. As many of you know, Jeff has an ebook called Rethink the Way You Sell. You can find that on his website. And Jeff, tell them the other places where they may be able to download the ebook.
You can go to rethinkthewayyouSell.com. That's the name of my ebook. It is a guide to owning your sales process. Eventually, and I'm going to say it out loud because otherwise it may not get done. Eventually, that's going to be a book. It's going to be something you can hold in your hands. This project started as a way to kind of get me thinking, but the more that I flesh these concepts out, the more I'm realizing that there's a lot more to talk about. So one day, available at least at Amazon.com and my website, you'll be able to find a hard copy of a more expanded book. But you can go to rethinkthewayyouSell.com. That really just redirects you back to my webpage. You can email me, jb@jeffbajorek.com, and I will happily send you a copy. This is a project that I put a lot of effort into and really kind of identifies the ethos of my approach to selling. And it's an approach that has worked for me, and I know it will work for you because as much as it lays out a framework, it allows you to be an individual within that framework. And everybody so far is at least telling me that they like it. So if they're willing to say so, then I'm pretty sure you'll like it too.
Well, I'm going to jump on that bandwagon because I can tell you it's very rich with tips and techniques for truly owning your sales process. What we're talking about today is actually a quick reference sheet that Jeff provides as part of his ebook. It talks specifically about 5 tenets of great prospecting. So they start with know what you bring to the table, know who you need to be talking with, create tension to create sales. And we've already recorded 3 different episodes on each one of those 3 tenets. Today, we're going to talk about being the expert, and then we're going to wrap it all up with keeping your swagger.
Yes, I think swagger is just such a great word. I forget what
it just rolls off the tongue, right? Yeah.
But we want to talk today, at least on this episode, about being the expert. And it's one thing to know everything about your product inside and out, but that kind of knowledge alone and by itself is not expertise. It's one thing to know something. It's another thing to be able to use it, right? It's one thing to be able to speak English. It's another thing to have command of the English language. And if you have command of the language, you are an expert in how to use that material, how to use those words, how to put sentences together, how to be persuasive. And this is not a lesson in English or grammar or studies, but I want to use that analogy as a means of understanding what expertise is. Great, you know your product, but do you know how it's being used? Do you know why people would buy it? Do you know why people wouldn't buy it? Do you know how people can take it and personalize it and extend the benefits of those products, of those services, in order to get more out of it than you could ever put on a brochure or a website? Do you know it and its use and its effectiveness beyond that of anybody else? Are you really the expert in it? And it's going to require that level of expertise in order for you to show your prospects what becomes possible by working with you. And they won't know what becomes possible just by reading your website.
It almost seems, Jeff, as if it's not just about your product and how your product becomes valuable, but it's also being the expert on your prospect, right? So understanding their business.
It's understanding their business, understanding your product, and how the two will work together to create something that is hopefully bigger than the two of those parts coming together on their own. All right, so underneath this, be the expert kind of the 5 keys to effective prospecting, number 4 is be the expert. And my kind of subheadings that you can see in this quick guide that comes along as the bonus materials is you've got to tailor your solution to their needs, to the needs of your prospect. You've got to be able to show them what becomes possible by working with you. And then your third part of that, in understanding your level of expertise and what you bring to the table, is being able to move the process along to the next step. An expert level salesperson will be able to get that commitment to move the process forward. The kind of hidden benefit or previously unstated benefit of this is when you establish yourself as an expert, you become a peer. You become someone who is valuable to your customer's business process, or valuable to, if you're selling something direct to a consumer, you're becoming a part of their day-to-day process. And that is something that creates a balance within this, customer salesperson relationship that you really need in order to be consultative. If you are trying to provide advice, if you are really trying to become a consultant in a business-to-business sale, to that prospect or to that customer, you need to be on equal footing with them. You may never know as much about their business as they do, but you need to have enough knowledge about their business in order to figure out where your product or your service can be inserted and implemented into their business to be able to take them to the next level. And I think that's a concept that most salespeople miss, especially business to business. Sure, here's this software platform. Here's this office productivity tool. Here's this, whatever it is. Well, how is it going to take them the next step? I think a lot of people miss that, Christie.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't you find, because I know a lot of people are sitting there going, good Lord, how much research do I have to do on every single prospect that comes across my desk? But at the end of the day, once you've done this once and understood exactly how your product fits inside a particular industry or with a particular type of prospect, it becomes a fairly easy process to repeat, don't you find?
Well, no question. And that's why industry specificity is such a common thread that you'll see, whether it's through, companies that specialize in certain product lines, or it's consultants that specialize in certain industries. When you know the ins and outs and you speak the language and you know the jargon and you're not thrown off by these little curveballs that are thrown by those in the know, so to speak, you find that these kinds of subtleties become second nature to you. And that helps in terms of building rapport, as well as in just an understanding of the industry or the problems or the issues that everybody is kind of up against. In healthcare, it was, okay, how do we get a new solution through without it costing so much more money that no one will ever pay for it, right? And everybody feels that same squeeze. And particularly here in the United States, healthcare has been a topic for the past 15 years or so in terms of some of the solutions or the solutions that we don't have yet for problems that we've seen for quite some time. So it's not about having to do so much research sometimes. It's finding out, going back to actually, step number one, what do you bring to the table, right? Knowing how what you do fits. Now, I don't specialize in an industry. I've got a healthcare background. I'm really good in healthcare. But what I've noticed is that there are common themes throughout sales processes across all industries as they relate to empathy, as they relate to understanding, as they relate to the whys, so to speak, of the why people are doing what they're doing in the first place. Those common themes are the language that I speak, and they're a language that every one of my prospects and customers understands. So it doesn't have to be so much an industry or a vertical. You just have to find out where your commonality is, where your connection is. And, you go back to key number 3, create tension. You cannot have tension without first having a connection. It scales backwards too. It scales on a you can scale infinitely small, which I think is a very, very good thing to do. It's a great thing to start, or a great place to start. But also, when you can step back and realize all the commonalities that you can touch on and how they relate to specifically the people you're talking to, it's not about doing so much research. It's about just understanding where the connection is.
Sure, and not trying to take too many shortcuts in that process too. Oh. It's such a fine line. I chuckled because this episode will be called "Be the Expert," and we have another episode that we did not too long ago that was called "Nobody Cares About Your Product." Yes. So it's the juxtaposition of those two episodes are interesting, but there is a fine line, and you have to know your product. And you have to be an expert in how it fits within your customer's ecosystem. But it's not about feeds and speeds. And I think that's the thing that is really important for people to take away is that this is not about, you need to understand feeds and speeds. You need to understand it. You don't need to parrot it back to your client. You need to be able to talk it or have a conversation with them about why this is valuable and why it matters to them.
And that's exactly why I think, I don't think those two episodes are juxtaposed to one another. I think
just from a title perspective. I think
creative copywriting, right?
Yeah. The content is good. So it's all about creating conflict, right?
Well, and we're saying the same things when we say that, right? It's not about your product. It's what is the outcome that your product is going to create. And do you have a level of expertise within your own realm, whatever realm that is, as small or as big as that realm is, to be able to work within it and really create something special? And that's where great salespeople separate themselves. I mean, being the expert, can you tailor your solution? Can you show them something that was previously impossible before you came along? And is that possibility even going to be something they're looking for?
Yeah.
That is a place where a lot of salespeople just don't ever go. And quite frankly, and this is of course it works like this. They're going to they don't think about it because they don't know something like that is possible.
Now, when you say the they is the salespeople?
Yeah. So I'll back up and I'll restate it because I cut myself off, which, happens from time to time. But most salespeople don't strive for this extra level of expertise because they're not even aware that something like this is possible, that a level of expertise such as this is possible. Most salespeople don't realize the amount of change they can create when they attain this level of expertise. Mm-hmm. And that's the folly of it. And kind of the circular reference to it is that when I'm telling you as a salesperson, the listener, that you should be creating possibilities in the minds of your prospects and customers that they don't know exist, I'm creating a level of possibility in your mind as the salesperson that a position such as that exists. And that is, I never thought about that. It was 10 years in the field before I realized that when I could become an advisor to my clients, when I could become someone who was looked at as an expert, someone who was looked at who had good judgment, someone who was looked at as knowing stuff, right? Becoming a resource. We always thought, my mentor always said, well, you got to become a resource. Oh, what does a resource mean? It's
Right.
another way of saying expertise. So I say you've got to be the expert rather than becoming a resource, because he'll file some kind of patent and trademark infringement suit against me and come after me for royalties over all these books that are free. And he knows who he is, and he's listening right now, and he's smiling.
Well, and I think too, we talk a lot about giving value first. When you think about how do you create deep, valuable connections, you give value before you ask for something in return. And you become that valuable element. You become almost a product in and of yourself when you have that level of expertise and ability to quantify and qualify your product in your client's environment. So that's a huge element when you can be the value.
And value is one of those words that I don't think we have enough time on this episode to get into it, because value is such a subjective thing, and I can go on all kinds of rants about what that even means. It was actually the first blog I ever wrote. The first blog post I ever created was about value and about how nebulous of a word that is, because it's impossible to define objectively. But we'll save that for another episode. Maybe we'll record that one next week. But putting yourself in a position to provide that value first and foremost, then providing that value builds your reputation. It builds your level of expertise. Listen, you can call yourself an expert, but if nobody else calls you an expert, you're not one.
Right.
And
right.
The way that you build your reputation, the way you build that credibility is by giving people what is going to be valuable to them time and time again. And, it's a funny thing that happens. The more you give it away, the more people come in looking for it. And they come and they ask you for it. And it's almost a counterintuitive concept. But what's interesting is that if the more you provide it, the more people will come and get it. It seems counterintuitive, but if you come from this place of abundance, you should always have something to give. When you're an expert, you've always got more to give. So there are some people who say, well, I don't want to give it all away for free. Well, for you to be concerned about giving it all away for free suggests that there's an end to the amount of expertise you have.
Right. Suggests that you will stop learning now.
Well, not only will you stop learning, but the thing is, how do you create a customer for life if you have a finite supply of value that you can provide?
Mm-hmm.
To suggest that you're just somehow going to run out of it that's a bad place to be. If you're going to run out of expertise for this particular customer, you got a bigger problem than finding more customers.
Yeah, very true.
And that's as it relates to follow-up, and I talk a little bit about this in the ebook and things along those lines, is you should constantly be providing that level of value in the eyes of the customer. And, your follow-up should have a value proposition to it. Your prospecting attempts should be testing from different angles, every single time. You never want to make the same mistake twice, but you always want to follow through, and you create that level of expertise by always having something good to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it means you need to step back a little bit and understand what that process is going to look like before you start it. But other times it's just believing in yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about this, on the next episode about swagger and that, self-belief on steroids, so to speak, where you always know that there's something good about what you're going to bring to the table.
Yeah. Well, and, I want to switch gears on you just a little bit here.
Sure.
So when you break down the section on being the expert,
Mm-hmm.
you talk about tailoring your solutions,
Mm-hmm.
showing your customers what's possible
Mm-hmm.
by working with you. And then the third one, which I think we could have an entire episode on, is asking for the next step. So talk me through what you were thinking of here in this particular section.
In terms of asking for the next step?
Yeah.
Well, I think a master salesperson or even an apprentice salesperson with a little bit of experience needs to know when to ask for the next step. You need to feel that situation out. You need to know where you're going in the sales process. You need to have a level of mastery in your sales process, expertise of where you've come from and where you're going. And you need to make sure that you're moving the process along. Someone who doesn't have a level of expertise is not going to be able to control the conversation. And you need to be able to control these conversations. For as much as is out there about the buyer's journey and how far along in the buying process the buyer is before they even decide to call you, that approach has a flaw in it. Yes, the buyer knows more than they ever have before they call you. But that is not fair to assume that the buyer or the prospect knows everything they need to know. And so when you just cede the entire process to the buyer, that's when you become an order taker. And I don't think being an order taker is a bad position to be in. You know, we've had the hunter versus farmer discussion in the past, Christie, and
Sure.
I think the best hunters find places to farm. But when you become an order taker, that's when you lose your value. That's when you are not being asked for your expertise. You're just being asked to enter product codes and SKU numbers and make sure stuff gets shipped on time. For you to not have some sort of control over that sales process, not have some sort of control about what happens next, where to go next, that's where you're kind of abdicating your role as a salesperson. And so I think that's why asking for the next step falls under the role of expertise in knowing where to go next and how to get it there.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's a great wrap up to our episode on expertise. So as a reminder, in this particular tenet, be the expert. You should tailor your solutions to your customers' needs, show them what becomes possible by working with you, and finally, ask for the next step. And I'll repeat it, ask for the next step.
Christie, you know what we can't forget to do is ask for the next step.
Oh, good. You were listening. I love that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of The Why and the Buy. Stay tuned next week for the final tenet from Jeff's Keys to Effective Prospecting. Keep your swagger. And until then, Jeff, when you know your why,
your hows and your whats get much better. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. See you later.
I told you once, I've told you twice. I told myself it doesn't matter.
Hey, thanks for listening to us on the Why and the Buy podcast. If you like us, tell us. Send us a message at the Why and the Buy on Twitter, or leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you got this podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Talk to you next week.
Well, what are you gonna do? I'll never understand your point of view.
How about the music on this podcast? We call them our house band, they call themselves Haskins, and they're based out of Plymouth, Michigan. If you want to hear more from them, go to haskinsmusic.com and check them out.
Don't regret the things you did that brought you here. Well, how do you figure?
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.